Hello, and welcome once again to City Club, a regular production of KXCR 90.7 in Florence, Oregon, your community-run, volunteer-operated station on the coast of Oregon. Today's program features Ned Hickson, Editor-in-Chief, Siuslaw News. The title, Perspectives on Small-Town Newspapers. Ned is, of course, Editor-in-Chief, an award-winning columnist, a humorist, author. He has been a corporate chef, no less, volunteer firefighter, and community actor, who shared his rich professional background and 19-plus years with the newspaper, which led to his deep belief in the importance of small-town newspapers throughout America. And please remember, if you wish to attend these meetings, they're held in the Siuslaw Library's Bromley Room at 1469th Street in Florence. The program is free from noon to 1 p.m. and open to the public. For questions, email Ruth at socialpollinator@gmail.com.
It's a real honor to be the first speaker of 2018. There's nowhere to go but up from here, so congratulations on that. So I thought I would just kind of give an overview of journalism and newspapers in general, kind of the trend, where things are going, how community newspapers sort of fit into that role, what we're trying to do to embrace technology to help us become more relevant, the things that we're already doing, the things that we hope to do, and then at the end I'll just kind of open it up to whatever questions you may have. I brought some notes with me. I'm not really much of a speech guy, so I'll just kind of go off the cuff here. Just a quick overview of newspapers. A lot of people have been saying for several years now that newspapers are on the way out. Print news medium is going away. But there's some interesting statistics that I looked up, because from my experience, it's not that way. So I thought, well, I need to find something that's going to justify what I'm feeling about the newspaper industry. A couple things I found. In a recent Nielsen-Scarborough study, 70% of adults in the United States, or more than 169 million, read newspapers each month, whether in print, online, or on their app. But these are actual newspapers. These aren't just online publications. These are newspapers, Washington Post, all the way down to the Siuslaw News. People are reading them either in print, online, or on their apps, with their apps. Last November, New York Times had 130,000 new subscribers in that month. The Wall Street Journal had a 300% increase in subscriptions. 300% increase. I'll do my echo thing. 300%. The Los Angeles Times subscription went up 61%. Most of this was attributed to the elections. But I think it said something even more important, which is that people are willing to invest their money because they believe in the importance of journalism. When people feel like, oh wow, we really need to know what's going on, they turn to their newspapers, whether it's a national newspaper or their local newspaper. The interesting thing is that while the large national newspapers, Washington Post, New York Times, New Yorker, those kinds of things, saw a huge jump, the sort of mid-range regional newspapers, Oregonian, those kinds of things that are sort of in between, actually have seen a decrease. But community newspapers, non-dailies, 15,000 readers or below, actually have seen a continual increase over the last 10 years. I'll give you some statistics here. According to the Institute of World Journalism at the University of Kentucky, more than 20 million Americans get their news from small circulation, non-daily weekly newspapers. That's and in fact, 1 in 3 small-town newspapers gained circulation in 2017. 1 in 3 newspapers of circulation of 15,000 or less saw an increase in circulation. And I saw somewhere in here, a study of the national newspapers found that 7,000 non-daily newspapers in the U.S. had a combined circulation of 65.5 million readers. Okay, 7,000 non-daily newspapers like Siuslaw News, Cottage Grove Sentinel, all those kinds of papers. That's compared to daily newspapers in the U.S. saw 45.5 million. So the non-daily, smaller newspapers have 20 million more subscribers than the combined number of subscribers for national newspapers, Washington Post, New York Times, Los Angeles Times. 20 million more Americans are reading their small-town papers. And the reason for that is because in the age of the internet, so much of the national news that we get in the larger papers, you can just go online and find it. But you're not going to go online and find what happened at last night's city council meeting, or what's going on at the port, or who's raising money to help with the local Boys and Girls Club, or an accident that happened and one of your neighbors was hurt and you want to know what's going on. That's the void that the small town community newspapers fill. Arthur Miller and keep in mind, Siuslaw News, our circulation is at the very low end of that. We're a little over 8,000. So we're at like halfway point of the non-dailies. But our subscription over the last 2 years has increased, I think, what do I have it here? By 7%, which may not sound like a lot, but we have a pretty captured audience. So 7% of Florence is a lot. Arthur Miller once said a good newspaper is like the nation talking to itself. I thought that was great, and I think community newspaper is like a community that talks to itself. It's the same thing, as the large paper, except it's how we communicate with each other. As a lot of you know, I was the sports editor here for a long time. I started the paper in 98. And the very first thing that I covered was an event at Siuslaw. It was the last football game of the season. It was called the Mud Bowl. Everyone remember because it was just a big fat mess. It was raining. It was at the old Hans Peterson Field. And it was my first assignment. And I ran out with my camera and I took, I'm sure at least 100 photos. But the problem was that back in those days we used film. So film canisters hold about 36 shots. But I knew I took 100 photos. And I'll be darned if once I went over in the dark and I cracked the back of that open and not one frame had advanced in that camera. And I had about 2 minutes left in the game. So I shot 3 rolls of film in 2 minutes of that last couple minutes of the game. So that was my introduction to journalism. When I graduated from Siuslaw High School, I had moved here in 81 with my family from California. And we bought a place up to North Fork, and it was a total culture shock to me. I came here from Southern California, surfer boy, long hair, go down the bus, go to the beach, and next thing I knew, I'm walking down a 1 mile dike on the North Fork, trying to catch my school bus on a wooden bridge wearing mud boots, and I hated it here. I just hated it. And finished my school year, went back to see my father in California, and I couldn't wait to get back. I had the opportunity to see what I really had here was something pretty special, and I realized that small town life gives you an opportunity to sort of take life at your own pace as opposed to being shoved along with everyone else. So when I left here after I graduated in 84, I didn't go to college. I've never been to college. I went right into the workforce. I started working as a busboy. I drove into Dallas, Texas with $300 in a Volkswagen van on a Sunday in downtown Dallas. I grabbed a newspaper, I found a place to live, and I found a job. By Monday, I had my apartment, and I went in there was a brand new restaurant opening up, went in as a busboy. The only shoes I had were cowboy boots that were dress shoes, because I couldn't wear tennis shoes, so hey, I'm going to Texas, I'm bringing boots with me, right? Got the boots here in town at the Thrifty Threads back then, $10. I wore those cowboy boots until I got my first check, so I could afford, actual dress work shoes. And the whole floor in there was tile. Everywhere I went was, can I take that for you? Clunk, 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 clunk. Back to the dish room. Clunk, 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 clunk. So I eventually got promoted to become a busser trainer, believe it or not. They flew me around the United States training bus boys to open restaurants for houligans. So I went to Anchorage, Alaska, New York City, Miami, Florida, on their dime to fly me around and train people how to bus tables. And then eventually I worked my way into the kitchen. Again, low man on totem pole, pantry cook. Don't get him near anything that's hot. Just leave him with salads and desserts. But I eventually worked my way into becoming assistant chef, and then an actual chef, and then a regional chef for Morrison Incorporated within the same company. By that time, I'd moved to Atlanta, Georgia. I had restaurants to oversee. I had 15 restaurants to oversee between Kentucky, Alabama, Louisiana, Georgia. I know I'm forgetting somebody, but anyway, there's a lot of restaurants in there. And I loved it, and eventually I knew I wanted to end back in Oregon, come back here once I started having kids and a family, and so I went to work for California Pizza Kitchen, transferred back here with it because they had a store that was opening up. I worked really hard to get recognized. One of the ways I did it was I wore suspenders when I was working on the floor. And I knew our regional director was there all the time, and I wanted it to stand out. So I wore suspenders because I thought, there's nobody else wearing suspenders. Nobody else is stupid enough to wear suspenders. But I knew it would help me stand out a little bit. And all the cooks called me Senor Torantes, which means Mr. Suspenders. And but it got noticed, and I worked hard, and they transferred me. I ended up back in Portland, which was my dream, back in Oregon, my hometown, my home state. And one day, I found out there was an opening here at the Siuslaw News for a sports person. And I thought, maybe I'll go ahead and throw my hat in the ring. I have no experience, no journalism experience. I've been writing my whole life, but other than that, I got nothing. So I sent in some samples. Bob Serra was the editor at the time. I went in, interviewed with him. I was up against two people from the University of Oregon, journalism grads. And apparently Bob had been drinking that day. And so he hired me instead. And I've been there ever since. So in the 20 years I've been with the newspaper, I've done sports as the sports editor, writer, and at the Siuslaw News, we don't have a pagination department, and we don't have proofreading department, and we don't have, you write your stories, you paginate your pages, you take your photos, you do your photos, you lay out your pages, you edit your work, other reporters edit your work. That's just how you do it, but you learn a lot of things doing that. And when the position opened up for the editor a little over a year ago, it had come up a couple times, and I just didn't really feel like I was ready for it. But when it came across this last time, I thought, I think I'm ready to do this as long as I can do it kind of the way I wanted to do it. And John Bartlett, who was our regional publisher, and Jenna Bartlett, I sat down with them, and they were all on board. And I have not regretted it. It's been one of the very best decisions I've made because I love it. And I love our community, and I really believe in the role that community newspapers play in what we do. One of the things that we've tried to do, and I'm going to move on here to some of the goals that we have as a community newspaper, and one of the things is we've tried really hard to find the things that are happening at a national level: opioid addiction, death with dignity, homelessness. Those are not just issues that we read about in the Washington Post. As many of you know, particularly here on the West Coast, those issues are becoming a crisis. Affordable housing, those kinds of things. So we've really tried to steer towards finding national issues that have a local impact, and how, not just to talk about it in the context of what's happening someplace else, but what does it mean here? And that has been one of our goals, and I feel like we've done a pretty good job of that. To be honest with you, not everyone's been happy with that. Our series that we've been running, the Coastal Life in Jeopardy series, has gotten mixed. Some people say that it's painting Florence in a bad light. Other people say, thank God you're doing it, because these are things that are there that people really need to know about. And ultimately, I feel like as long as people on both sides are yelling at us, then we're right exactly where we need to be. If we got too much on one side and nothing on the other, then that's a problem. But I think ultimately our responsibility is to initiate conversation and to get people talking. We have so many highly intelligent people within our community with a vast range of experience, age levels, backgrounds. We need to cultivate that experience and those ideas in a way that are going to help us all move forward together as a community. Whether it's affordable housing, economics, homelessness, opioid addiction, whatever, we're not immune. And I think we've discovered that the town that Florence is now and the town that we're evolving into is not the town that it was 20 years ago. We're not isolationists by any stretch. Maybe in the old days we kind of felt like we were sort of in this little bubble and we were sort of protected against those things. But unfortunately, that time I think has kind of passed. Not to say that it's a bad thing, but I think if we don't recognize it and we don't take a hard look at those things that are challenges that we face, that are the same as the challenges being faced everywhere else, then we're in trouble. We really need to look at those things. At the same time, the other role of our newspaper is to celebrate the things that we do good and to recognize the people who contribute to the community, to the organizations that contribute to our community, to the people that make this town work, to the folks that we're helping, the ideas that we have. Our opinion page to me is my favorite page in the whole section besides where my column is. No, I'm just kidding. And the opinion page is my favorite page because it's where, to me, it's like it's just a community dialogue page. People say what they want to say and the way they need to say it, and people don't agree, but it's an exchange of ideas. And one of the things I wanted to do early on was to make sure that when people wrote in letters, that we did so in a constructive manner. I can't tell you how many hours I've spent and how many people that I've gone back and forth with on letters, not to discourage them from making their point, but to encourage them to make their point in a way that is not going to shut down the people who don't necessarily already agree with them. I tell them many times, there's no point in writing a letter and offering an opinion that within the first paragraph is going to cause everyone who doesn't already agree with you to stop reading what you're saying. So you can't come in and write a letter that's going to put someone on the defense right away. So I've spent a lot of time going back over letters with people saying, well, what if you worded it this way? Or, well, can we move this down here so that you don't get, that part about throttling them by the throat because they're idiots? Maybe we could soften that up just a little bit. Maybe move it more towards the end, that kind of thing. And to my, I can't say it's really my surprise because of the people that are within this community, but to my joy, I don't think I've had anyone yet who, after I made a suggestion, said, forget you, I don't even want my letter to go onto the page. Every single person I've talked with has taken as much time with me as I've taken with them to help make their point in a way that's going to actually make a difference, or could at least persuade someone to look at their point of view. They may not necessarily agree with them anymore, but at least understand their point of view, which is the most important thing. When we had our DACA presentation a while back over at City Light Cinemas, which has been really terrific in supporting some of the new ideas that we're trying to do and instilling conversation, it was really easy. As I stood at the front, I looked and I said, okay, these people over here don't agree with these people over here, because you could just tell immediately. It's sort of like when you go to a wedding and you have the bride's family on one side and you have the other on the other. It was pretty obvious. But one thing that was really wonderful was that at one point, and I'll never forget it, at one point, someone somehow who was sitting in one row was sitting in front of someone directly behind them, who had the complete opposite feeling about the DACA situation. And so the first person stood up and made their piece, made their point. Person behind them stood up, made their point, which is completely different than that person. And the person in front turned around and said, I don't agree with you, but I never thought about it that way. And the other person was so taken back by that they hugged each other right there in the middle of the thing. And I thought, man, if no one else in this whole, if those two people leave here feeling like, I don't agree with you, but I understand it, and I'm not going to fight with you about it, the whole thing was worth it. And that's what we were trying to do with the newspaper. People may not always agree with what we're doing and how the paper has changed, but I think ultimately it's about inspiring those conversations within our community, within the people who read the paper, to help us all move forward. One thing that has been really great is, I should back up. One of the things that people said that is going to be the demise of the newspaper is social media, being able to get your news on the internet, on websites, that kind of stuff. Who needs the printed page anymore when you can just go on the internet and go to their website and read the stories? We've discovered that, and I'm very encouraged by this, that in a recent study, and I have it on here, the millennial generation is actually leaning away from online news and is leaning towards print news. They're saying, you know what, I'm standing back and I'm watching all these crazy people, and I think I'd rather just get my news from the source, because a lot of times you can't tell what's real news on the internet and what's not real news. But when you're holding it in your hand, if it's the Siuslaw News or the New York Times or whatever it is, this is the source. This is not somebody pretending to be them. This is the actual source. And whether you agree with it or not is one thing, but at least that's where the source came from. And millennials are really leaning away. So to me, I see there seems to be a trend towards returning to print journalism, print media, because people feel like at some point more that they can trust that than they can social media, which I tend to agree with. But one of the things that has helped us as a newspaper become more relevant is the internet. It has actually helped us to become more or closer to being a daily newspaper. When something happens Before we had a website, before we had social media, something happened. Oh man, I can't wait for Wednesday. It's only 3 days from now, but we'll get that story in there. Well, now something happens right away. Boom. We can put it on the website. We can share it to Facebook. We can do a breaking news. Whereas when anyone who's following us or who has a subscription will get a notification on their phone or their tablet or whatever saying, hey, there's a police shootout happening right now down 126 by the casino. Don't go down there. More to come later. That's just one example, but that really happened. We were able to use our breaking news to let people know, hey, this is a dangerous situation. Don't go there right now. Or if you hear gunshots, this is what's happening. It's not Roy Moore coming to town with this guy. It's a totally different situation. And it has also allowed us to be more relevant because we can we'll write up a story on Thursday afternoon because if something happened Wednesday night, we don't have to wait until Saturday. We can go ahead and put it online, put it on our website, share it with people. People can share it with other people. So we kind of have the best of both worlds. You have the hard newsprint, and we don't put everything online that goes into the newspaper. So the newspaper still is a supplemental thing to the website that has more information you're going to get from the website. But for the important stories, we're able to get them out there a lot faster. And in some cases, like the Coastal Jeopardy series, for example, they're all linked under one thing. So you can go to one place on our website and read every single part in that series, one after the other, and it's there for forever. And people can share it to. One thing that's been interesting is we did some research on our social media and stuff, and we discovered that more than half of the people who read the stuff on our website aren't even from Oregon. They're from all around the country. Particularly this Jeopardy series that we're doing about coastal life, the homelessness, the housing, affordable housing, economics, and most of them are along the West Coast, Washington, Los Angeles, because they're all facing the same thing that we are. Coastal communities throughout the West Coast are facing the same things that we are, and a lot of them are looking at what we're doing and saying, yeah, well, here's some of the things that they're doing, or yeah, this is exactly how I feel. That's exactly what's happening here. How are they dealing with it? So we're not just having an impact here on the local level, but it's part of the community, but in a larger sense. All the other communities that are small communities along the West Coast are able to take what we're doing and hopefully what other newspapers are doing, and we're communicating in the same way that we are on a small scale here in Florence. And that's how change happens, not just in the small way, but in the big way. And that's the way that community newspapers actually have a national impact or regional impact, thanks to the internet. So that part for us is very exciting because we're not just, a twice weekly in a print that, 6,000 people may read and that's as far as it ever goes. We're actually able to have an impact on a larger level. And it's the same way with newspapers throughout the United States. The newspaper, Siuslaw News, has been here for 128 years. I've been here for 115 of those, or at least it feels like it sometimes. And it has continued to evolve into something that has managed to stay relevant for all those years. And I have to toot the horn of my news team because we have I've been there 20 years. I've worked with some really great reporters over that time, had some really great editors. But I have to say, this is one of the best, if not the best, news teams that I have worked with in my 20 years there, just because of the range of experience, the commitment level, the understanding of the internet, and how we can utilize that to be more relevant to our readers here and people other places. We found out at the Main Street thing at the FEC the other night that our governor, Kate Brown, she wasn't able to make it, but she sent someone in her place, and that person came up to Chantel, our features editor, and said, "Hey, I recognize your name. I just want to let you know we've been reading your series on Coastal Jeopardy, and it's being shared around the governor's office." So the governor's office is reading stuff we're doing here in Little Florence, but they're using it as a way to say, "Hey, okay, this is identifying some of the problems that a lot of communities, small coastal communities, are dealing with right now." And that's because and going back to my team, that's because of the kind of news that they're able to report, the commitment level they have, the trust that they've been able to build with people in the community to talk with them on and off the record, because they're willing to talk with us. In all my years, I don't ever remember getting as many phone calls from people saying, "Hey, I've got this issue. Can you look into it, please?" We're slowly becoming a source for people to go to when they feel like, "Hey, this is somebody that will look into an issue." And sometimes we look into things and we don't write about it because it gets resolved. But as I told one of my reporters who spent 2 weeks on a story that resulted in a non-story, simply because he had gotten involved and the parties were able to come together on it, was that, you know what, it's not always about the story. Sometimes it's just about making a difference, even if nobody ever reads about it. And that's another part of it that's very gratifying. I know I've wandered all over the place with this. I appreciate your patience. I'm very passionate about what we're doing at the paper. I'm very passionate about how we can serve the community and continuing to become a better paper. And with that, I will open up to questions because I'm sure everyone here has great ideas on how we can make it a better paper. Any questions?
I have a question about feature writing. Do you have a method for getting those stories to the person who's going to investigate them? Do they bring in the ideas? What's the process? Let me first talk about we have different kinds of news that we write about. We have like, for example, a feature story tends to be one that's written different than a news story in the sense that it's a feature on a person. We have a little more latitude in how we tell that story. Sometimes we'll tell it in the first person, that sort of thing. And then we have our actual news stories, and those come from different things. Sometimes it's a breaking news situation. Other times it's something that we hear about that we need to look into because it's rumor or it's speculation. I'll give you an example, and I'm only bringing this up as an example because it's something I think everyone has read about, but the Oregon Coast Humane Society, for example. That was something that started because of some things that were being said on Facebook that it seemed like a lot of rumor and speculation, so we wanted to look into it and sort of try to separate fact from fiction or speculation or rumor and those kinds of things. Same thing we had back when there was a short-term AIDS scare here in Florence about a year ago. Someone at the hospital had come in. 3 people had the AIDS virus. And Facebook was exploding. People were like, everybody in town's got AIDS, and they're all having sex, and they're spreading it, and it's all druggies and all this stuff. And we thought, wow, we need to jump on this right away and kind of help people figure out, okay, what's real here? What's really happening? So we contacted Lane County Health Department. We contacted the hospital. We were able to put together and say, okay, everyone take a deep breath. It's just 3 people. They all have a connection. It's not randomly 3 people who have no connection at all. There was a reason why these particular 3 people had this particular situation. It's not spreading like wildfire. It's not an indication that that there's some sort of secret senior sex group that's going on in Florence, which was another thing that we had heard on there. There's all this stuff. It was just crazy. So we got that in right away because people were really starting to freak out. So part of our job is that as well. And so sometimes we get our news ideas from that, things that are just happening in the community that we hear about. Then other things, we'll get all press releases first come to me, and then I send them on to the person who does the press releases. But I do that so that I can see what people are sending in. And sometimes a simple press release will give us an idea for a story. So that's essentially, reporters will come in with their own stories sometimes. We have a meeting twice a week, editorial meeting. We talk about things we're working on. I have a list this long of stories that are on our futures list that we want to get to. Sometimes we have to push them aside because something will happen that we need to report on right away. But we get them from multiple venues, whether it's reporters themselves or things that are happening or press releases that we expand on because we think it's important. And that was a really long answer to a short question.
Do you have reporters' beats?
I beat them quite often, actually. Yeah, that's how I keep them in line. No, we do. We have a city reporter, we have a community reporter, we have a features editor, and then we have whatever I do, whatever that is. But I also cover sports. I wanted to keep sports when I transitioned into the editor, which we hadn't done before. But I felt like I'd been doing it long enough, and I love it. I'm not really a sports guy, like at the professional sports level, but I love local sports because it's kids. They're doing it not because because they're prima donnas or because they want the big contract or be on a Wheaties box. They do it because they love their school and they want to represent. So those are our basic
beats. And one of the reasons I kept sports was so that we could have an actual city reporter, a community reporter, and a features editor, rather than me working on special projects, and then we'd have to, basically hire another sports editor. Our hard news or city beat reporter handles anything that has to do with the police department, fire department, hospital, any of that kind of stuff. Chantel, our features editor, continues to do the Florence City Council because she likes that beat, kind of like I like sports. And then Jared, our community reporter, covers Dune City Council. He does a lot of Mapleton stuff. He does the Mapleton School. Mark Brennan, our city reporter, handles the Siuslaw School stuff. So everybody, we made a list of all the different ongoing things that we need to cover, divided those up, and that way we try to make sure that we don't miss anything. So all of the major organizations, programs, a community reporter, that would fall under Jared for Boys and Girls Club or the PTA or, things like that are community organizations, Siuslaw Outreach Services, those kinds of things. Yes, sir.
Are you owned by, in other words, is this a chain, your newspaper? And if so, do you get directions on things that you're supposed to cover, like Sinclair TV stations, for example?
Siuslaw News was purchased, I don't know the exact date, I can't remember, but it was over 10 years ago by News Media Corporation. So we are part of a corporation of small newspapers. We're one of the few on the West Coast. There's some in California. There's 3 in Oregon. And then the rest are all on the East Coast. But I'm happy to say, I'm very happy to say that we get no direction from them in terms of what we can and can't report on. We haven't been told, you need to publish this column on a regular basis. I've been very, very happy with the fact that they kind of let us do our thing. I think part of it is because we're a successful paper, and they don't want to mess with something that's already working. Not to say that doesn't happen a lot anyway, but yeah, we have been able to maintain our autonomy and do what we do in the way that we want to do it, and our publisher Jenna Bartlett has been extremely supportive in the changes that we've made and how we want to report on things and what we've reported on. I've never been told, we probably shouldn't report on that because it may cost us ad dollars or something like that. She's been just fantastic and extremely supportive of what we do in the newsroom. Yes, ma'am.
So if you have a subscription to the newspaper, does that include the online notices too?
Yes, it includes the online stuff. And also, if you need me to come to your house and read you the paper, that's also part of the package. So we can do that. But yeah, it includes, and then some people just get, because some people go back and forth. They live in Arizona and they live here. So they'll get the online one so that they can keep up with what's happening when they're away, because by the time the paper gets to where they're at, it's a week later. So it's, again, but the best of both worlds for people like that especially.
I remember when the paper was only published once a week, and then I heard from probably totally unreliable sources that the reason we went to twice a week was that it was a demand by Fred Meyers when they moved here. One of the conditions. But that raises the whole question of how much of the paper is supported by advertising and how much do the subscriptions take care of? I
had heard that same rumor. I was there at the time. I think it was a couple of reasons why that we expanded to twice a week. One of them was that we were just getting to be a bigger town, and trying to cram everything into one issue was getting to be more difficult. And maybe at the time, I think they were actually really looking down the road and saying, okay, so 2 years from now, are we still going to want to be a weekly? And if not, maybe we should make the change now. But I can tell you that I'm sure that Fred Meyer coming to town and wanting to have its flyers come out before Saturday certainly didn't hurt that decision process, but I think that may have been what sparked it, but I know that wasn't the only reason. And as far as advertising and what it does compared to subscriptions in terms of carrying the paper financially, there's always this debate back and forth about, who's more important? Is it the news or is it the advertising? Well, without the advertising, then you wouldn't have a newspaper to put stories in. well, without the news, nobody would read the paper. And was it the chicken or was it the egg? Ultimately, you really have to have both. The advertising is obvious. It certainly is more of a money generator than subscriptions. Subscriptions helps pay for certain things, but the majority of the financial part of our paper comes from advertising. And the reason people advertise is because they feel that people will read the paper. So the better we can make the paper, the more people want to read it, which makes the value of the paper more, which allows us to sell more advertising. We have tried very hard to keep a line between advertising, editorial, and what is known as advertorial, which is advertising that appears to be editorial but is actually not. And in those cases, we try to make it very clear that this piece has been paid for by someone. Everybody does it. It never shows up on the front page, or as it's always in a special section or something like that. But advertising, it's what fuels the engine for sure. Some people decide, I don't want the print, I just want the online subscription, which you can also do. Well, let's say you're you just moved to town. Hey, I love the paper. I want to get it. I want to become a subscriber. I want to get it in print, but I travel a lot, and I also want to be able to have it online. So when I'm, in Arizona, I can read it. When you go into subscribe, they will sign you up for the paper. You'll get the print edition, and then you will be asked if you would also like to have the online edition, which they'll give you a password, and they'll set you up, and then you use your password to get in. Because if you're not a subscriber and you go onto the website, you can see, I think, 10 stories, and then after that you have to pay for the rest. Or you can say, I don't want the print part, I just want to be an online subscriber, which you can also do. But you have to let them know when you subscribe. And you can change it at any time. You say, gee, I'm only getting print, but I think I'd like to get the online one. Let's do that too. Yes, ma'am.
This year has started off to be a very interesting one, and I'm wondering, you mentioned having future stories, and then you sort of at times shift into more ones that are happening at the time. With that longer view, what kinds of suggestions do you have for City Club topics and speakers that would be helpful to continue to support what is being done by the newspaper?
Everyone should subscribe. I think the best way to do that, this would be just my suggestion, was that to stay topical, just in the same way that we get many of our ideas for stories in the paper come from press releases. So by maybe following the newspaper and looking at some of the trends that are happening. For example, there's a new grant that is being offered to veterans that is supposed to help them with their coverage. And I don't know if it's healthcare, or I think it's just for services in general. I haven't read the whole thing yet. I got to be honest. We just got it today, but we're going to do a piece on that. But that has given us an idea of something that might be topical. We have a lot of veterans here in Florence. Yeah. So sometimes you can just look through the paper and kind of see some things that are happening, some things that are coming down the pipe. We're doing a story that's going to be in tomorrow's paper about the new bill that is giving back over 30,000 acres of land to the local tribes between here and Coquille and all that, because of and it was passed through the Senate and the House. It's on the president's desk. If it doesn't get signed by Saturday, it automatically goes into effect. That might be an interesting topic. So, I would suggest.
Thank you. That's the good tips to know.
And I'm not trying to say just only look at the Siuslaw News, but news sources are a great place to kind of get ideas for things that are happening, and whether it's the Register Guard, even. I know I said that out loud, but and that's another thing is kind of like we're trying to do with topics of opioid addiction and things that are national issues but have local implications. Yes. That's kind of like our buzz phrase in the newsroom. Someone will come in and say, "Hey, this is happening in Washington," or "This is happening." Okay, so what are the local implications? And if there are, then we explore that. If there aren't, then we don't.
We've been listening to City Club, a special program featuring Ned Hickson, editor-in-chief, award-winning columnist, humorist, author, previous corporate chef, volunteer firefighter, and community actor, who shared his rich professional background and 19-plus years' experience with the Siuslaw News, which led to his deep belief in the importance of small-town newspapers throughout America. It was held in the Siuslaw Library's Bromley Room at 1469th Street in Florence. The meeting meets once a month in that room. The program is free to the public from noon to 1 p.m., brought to you here on KXCR. See you next time.